Hey everyone, so back at it, just sharing some thoughts that were inspired by the book 5 Views on Biblical Inerrancy. Today I want to talk about some of the author's views of the difference between Acts chapter 9 and Acts chapter 22. In Acts chapter 9, it's talking about the conversion of Saul, or Paul, to Christianity, and it's the story of Jesus appearing to him on the road, and in Acts chapter 9 it says that the other people that were with Paul heard the voice of Jesus. However, just 12 chapters later, 13 in Acts chapter 22 it says that no one else heard the voice of Jesus. So in Acts chapter 22, I think it's Paul telling his own conversion story, and he says that only he heard the voice, no one else that was with him heard the voice of Jesus. So Acts chapter 9, other people did. Acts chapter 22, other people did not. And what's interesting about this difference is that it's not just a difference between two different books in the Bible or two different authors in the Bible. It's an apparent contradiction within the same book of the Bible by the same author, which is Luke. Some people try and explain away this difference by translating a certain word different. So in chapter 9 it's here, in chapter 22 it's understand. So, but that's not a good explanation for reasons I can't get into. Another explanation could be that Luke is just sort of not very smart, or kind of a forgetful person, and he, just sort of forgot what he said in chapter 9 by the time he got to chapter 22, but I sure hope not. I think we all hope that the writers of our Bible are at least smart enough to be consistent, when they want to be. So that's not a very good explanation either. What most of the authors in the book 5 Views on Biblical Inerrancy said is very interesting, because most of them were evangelical. Most of them believed in what they call biblical inerrancy. But most of them, interestingly enough, were willing to say that Luke tweaked the facts to sort of make the story do what he wanted it to do. So they're basically saying he knew full well that chapter 9 was different than chapter 22, but that didn't really matter to him. And what those authors are saying about this example is actually what a lot of biblical scholars say about all different sorts of things in the Bible. And what's crazy is that although biblical scholars talk about this sort of thing going on in the Bible, it's basically never talked about in like normal people circles. But biblical scholars always talk about how people writing about history back in those times were looser with the facts, or just didn't care about everything being totally factual like we do nowadays, or at least we often try to do nowadays. If you kind of think of it as a continuum, where over here is total, objective, neutral, factual truth, and over here is, absolute myth and fiction and not real. Writings for magazines or newspaper articles, at least respected ones, would try to be over here on the continuum, whereas back in those times, it would have been closer to here. Not absolute myth, but not total factual truth either. And so this sort of can raise a lot of questions about, well, why do we trust anything in the Bible then? And there's a lot that could be said about that, but just one quick thought is, I think the more recently that events happened to when the author was writing, the more it would be towards the factual end of the spectrum. So, you know, the biblical authors of the Gospels were writing, you know, even just 30 years later, some of them. You know, whereas other more Old Testament writings were written way after the events themselves. But for the New Testament Gospels, you know, if events are written just 30 years later, they would sort of naturally and have to stay closer to the facts, although still not 100% factual. Some thoughts to chew on.